Welcome to We Believe, a consideration of religious beliefs and God's Word, examined in conversation by James F. Walsh, an attorney and Roman Catholic deacon, and Dr. Richard Shriver, United Methodist minister and professor of theology. Each discussion embraces carefully chosen subjects, selected in an effort to deepen your religious awareness, in the sincere hope that We Believe will help provide a bridge of understanding among all the children of God.
Hello, I'm Jim Walsh, and this is my associate, Dr. Richard Shriver. Welcome to We Believe. Richard, today we'll be talking about the primacy of Peter, and it just means that Christ, during his course here on earth, pick out some one of his apostles to be head or chief among the apostles. And I might say here at the outset that we're not talking about papal infallibility. We will talk about that in a later program. But right now we're just trying to figure out if Christ appointed one of his apostles as the head or chief. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, to establish eventually the idea of Peter being the head of the church.
Well, you're jumping ahead. I was going to keep it a secret.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we can do the next show now.
All right.
But primacy of Peter. You're talking about number one.
Yeah, the head honcho, so to speak. Now, Richard, if you look through the Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles, I think you would find that Peter is mentioned, I think, 195 times, where all the others put together are mentioned only 130 times.
It was just last night I was counting all those.
Yeah, I bet you were. John is second in line with 27 citations. Now, what do you think that proves, Richard?
Nothing.
Well, you're right, it proves nothing. It does, however, prove Peter was around a lot, at least according to the gospel account and the account in the Acts.
I wonder if you took a poll, who among Christians would get the highest vote as the favorite apostle?
I'll tell you what I think. I think Catholics would vote for Peter, Protestants would vote for Paul.
No, I mean among the original 12.
Who, if they had an election?
Yeah.
I don't know. Who do you think?
Just take
Judas?
a poll. No, I think Peter would win, hands down. Yeah,
okay.
For all Christians.
Yeah.
And I think it's because he makes so many goof ups. We sort of identify with that.
Can identify. He was kind of a flannel mouth, actually, but he came out all right. Now, let's look at Matthew 7:24, and let's see here. When Christ first meets Peter, he said, "I'm going to change your name. I'm going to change your name to Rock." And in the Aramaic language, which Christ spoke, which the people spoke at that time, that is, according to my notes, Kepha, K-E-P-H-A. You are Kepha, and on this Kepha I will build my church. So would you mind reading that? What kind of rock does Christ have in mind?
You want the passage from Matthew 16.
Matthew, I think that's Matthew 7:24.
No, it's Matthew 16, verses 13, 19.
Well, that's the next quote, but the one I want right now is Matthew 7:24 to 27.
Okay.
It has to do with building a house on sand or on rock.
Everyone then who hears these words of mine,
Yeah.
this is of course Jesus speaking, and does them will be like a wise man who built his house upon the rock. And the rain fell and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock.
Right.
And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. And the rain fell and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it.
Well, the reason I wanted you to read that, Richard, is this is the kind of rock Christ had, I think, reference to. It's not a kind of rock that you quarry someplace and bring to the site of a building where you're building something. It's the bedrock you dig down into.
The foundation.
The foundation, right. Now, of course, we're reading there in English. Christ would have been speaking in Aramaic, which was later translated into Greek, and then finally into Latin and then English. But in Aramaic, the word there, bedrock, would be kapha. And of course, I think you could clarify into Greeks, it comes out Petros, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then that's how we get our name Peter.
The questionable pronunciation, Kepha or Cephas, is sometimes the pronunciation used. I don't know which is correct, so I'm not trying to correct you on it, but it's Cephas in the RSV Bible, and it is the word for rock.
Yeah. Well, anyway, this then would be the first hint of what Christ had in mind for Peter. And if you remember from the Old Testament, it seems like that God changes people's name, indicating what they might have in mind, he might have in mind for them to do. Remember, he changed Abram's name to Abraham, saying, you'll be father of a multitude. So here he's changed Peter's name to Rock. So now, Richard, now let's take a look at Matthew 16, 13 to 19. This is a very important passage here.
Right, and the passage you're asking for, from the Gospel according to Matthew. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do you say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And Jesus said to them, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter. Now, let's just pause and say Simon was his Jewish name.
Yeah.
Peter was the name that Jesus gave him, meaning rock.
Simon Bar Jonah, wasn't it? Simon, son of John, was his real name, yeah.
And so he's saying Simon Rock, Simon Peter replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter. And that's where the word that Jesus actually would have used was the Kepha.
You are rock, in
you
effect.
are rock.
Bedrock, actually.
And on this rock I will build my church, and the powers of death shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven.
Well, that obviously is a key passage for Catholics. He is saying here several things to Peter.
I'm not going to let you get away with that.
All right,
That's
go ahead.
a key passage for all Christians.
You too, huh?
Yeah, me too.
Well, welcome aboard, Richard.
Thanks.
All right. Where did I leave off here? You got me mixed up here, Shriver.
It's a key passage for Catholics because...
Okay, for everybody then, for all Christians. All right, first of all, he says, you're a rock, and on this rock I will build my church. So that's point number one. But point number two is, he says, I will give you the keys to the kingdom. Well, the key bearer in the Oriental court took the place of the king in the king's absence. I guess in the old days, he actually had the key around his neck. Later, it was more symbolic. But in the absence of the sovereign, the key bearer was second in command. And third, he says...
Kind of a vice president.
Yeah, vice president, kind of. So the third thing he says, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Now, that's a legal terminology of the day, which says whatever rules, laws, or regulations you make will be ratified in heaven. So this is, as you said, a tremendously important passage for all of us.
I think it's interesting that you bring in the legal.
Yeah, well, I kind of feel it.
Our audience may not know that you are an attorney and an ex-district attorney. So the prosecutor is at work here, folks.
Yeah, well, you didn't call me general, you know. Then they called DA general this. They can't
General
think of
Walker.
Yes, and I called you doctor, but you're not a doctor that helps anybody. No, you're a philosophical doctor. All right, moving right along, though. You know that during his public ministry, Christ often referred to himself as the Good Shepherd. I know my own know me, and so forth. It's there quite a bit. But then look at John 21, 15 to 17. There Christ is on the seashore. This is after the resurrection, and he's talking to Peter. Could you pick that up, Richard, please?
John 21:15. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." And he said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And he said to him, "Tend my sheep." And he said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep."
Well, Richard, you recall that in the Passion of Christ, when he's taken captive and brought in as a prisoner, Peter had previously said, "Oh, you know, I will stand up for you no matter what." And Christ said, "Before the cock crows, you're going to deny me 3 times." That's what Peter did. He denied him 3 times. But here, if you notice, Christ lets him affirm his love for him 3 times. So it would seem that
this is after the
the resurrection, after the crucifixion. It would seem that, figuratively speaking, Christ is turning over his shepherd staff to Peter before he goes into heaven. Now, quickly,
and forgiving him.
And forgiving him, poor Peter. But Peter, you know, Judas was despaired, but Peter came back, so to speak. Now, quickly, I'd have to say the question is, well, do we see any kind of leadership in the Acts of the Apostles where Peter would take over? It was Peter who preached the first sermon. 3,000 people were converted. That must have been a powerful sermon. It was Peter who performed the first miracle. And so Peter led the apostles during that time period. Yes, he did exercise that power. Peter then later, we know, went to Rome, became the first bishop of that city, and then the line of bishops down through the ages, from Peter right on up to our very day, there's an unbroken chain of bishops of Rome. So, Richard, that's kind of it, and I might say that the early fathers of the church, St. Cyprian, St. Augustine, St. Cyril, all of those people recognize the successor of Peter as being head of the church. That's pretty much all I wanted to cover, Richard. I left you a little time.
Well, I think we'll have a question and answer period later.
In a few minutes.
And some of the questions I'm sure that our audience would want to ask is, why is there controversy about whether Peter went to Rome or not?
Yeah, why don't you kind of let
there are those that have suggested that. I've done a lot of research in that as a Protestant.
Yeah.
I'm not coming at it from the Catholic point of view, but I've come to the conclusion that the Catholic Church has all along been right about Peter.
Tell them about you were in Rome and the guide was telling you that Peter was buried under the high altar and you didn't believe him?
In my early days of ministry, I was on a tour of Europe, and we were in Rome and a tour of the Vatican. And the guide said, here by the altar, Peter's buried under this altar. And I thought then, and we'll continue after the break, but I thought then, sure.
Well, I think this is a key thing, and we'll come back here after the break. Don't go away, folks. We're going to be talking about the primacy of Peter and perhaps answering some of your questions. But in the meantime, stay with us. We'll be right back.
Today's We Believe is brought to you by a grant from your local Knights of Columbus Council. Founded by Father Michael McGivney, the Knights of Columbus began when a few men gathered in a church hall in 1882. Today, the Knights of Columbus has a membership of over 1.5 million men, with local councils spanning the globe. The Knights of Columbus is a fraternal service order of Catholic men dedicated to providing support to the individual, the family, and the community. The principles of the order are charity, unity, fraternity, and patriotism. The Knights of Columbus truly surge with service. For more information, contact your local council or write We Believe, Post Office Box 50654, Nashville, Tennessee 37205. That's We Believe, Post Office Box 50654, Nashville, Tennessee 37205. And now, back to We Believe.
Well, we're back with questions and we hope a few answers to some of the questions that we've gotten about the primacy of Peter. Richard and I will do our best to try to answer them, and here with us today is our lovely moderator, Kim Ballinger. Kim, welcome back to We Believe.
Thank you, Jim. It's always a pleasure to be back with you guys.
You have some questions, perhaps?
I do. But before we begin, I'd like Richard to finish his story. I was pretty enthralled about the burial place of Peter.
Yeah.
We were in the St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and on a tour group through the great Cathedral of St. Peter at the Vatican, which Jim says is not a cathedral, it's a basilica. But it's a great church. You know, it's the largest Christian church in the world.
I believe it is, yeah.
Anyhow, the guide was telling us that directly under the altar were the bones of St. There. And this was years ago, and I was very critical of that, and I thought to myself, yeah, sure. In the years since, I've done a lot of research about it, and I found out that
gotten smarter since then.
She was right. In the 50s, the Pope actually directed excavations under St. Peter's Basilica and found a single datable first century grave. Of course, on the bones were etched, I am St. Peter.
Come off of that.
No, not that. Yeah. But that's only a part of the evidence that supports the fact that that's where Peter was buried. I think the most telling evidence is that the first church on that site was built by Constantine in the early 4th century. And at that time, there had not been a break in the presence of Christians in Rome since the time of Peter. They would have known where he was buried.
Well, Richard, you were asking something, and I interrupted you. You were talking about references to Peter in Rome and Babylon, or what was that about? I interrupted you when you were explaining that.
That is part of one of these questions, as a matter of fact, that we have. How do we know that Peter went to Rome?
Yeah, I thought he went to Babylon, Richard. Isn't that what Scripture says?
Can you expound about that?
In the Epistle of Peter, first Epistle of Peter, there is a closing that says, "Greetings from Babylon." Now, I don't think biblical scholars believe that Peter actually wrote that, but rather later disciples of Peter that were carrying on his work. But either way, that's a reference to Rome. Babylon had been destroyed some 500 years earlier. And that's what Jews and Christians called Rome, was their Babylon. So that, you know.
It wasn't a very favorable term.
No, Babylon Rome had been the great enemy of the Jews. And as Rome, the Jews, it was in the time of Peter and Jesus.
It was kind of a code word. Babylon meant Rome.
It meant Rome, yeah. So that really, instead of being evidence against Peter going to Rome, but there are a lot of different parts of that story. The relationship between Peter and Paul. I think Peter went to Rome to join Paul, who was already there. Mm-hmm.
What else you got, Kim?
Well, when we think about Peter, we think of a man with, or the Pope, excuse me. We think of someone who has immense power, just immense power. But does the Pope really have all of the authority of the church?
The church?
And I direct this to Jim.
You know, I read earlier in that when Christ said to Peter, "Thou art Peter, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And I said that that was legal terminology of the day, that meant whatever rules, laws, and regulations you make will be ratified in heaven. But you see, Christ said that to the other apostles too at another place in Scripture. I didn't read it. It's the same wording, that phrase is. So no, the Pope doesn't run the church by himself. The Pope runs the church with a college of bishops. Each bishop has authority in his own area. And so the idea is the Pope is, as we see it, the head of the church, the representative of Christ, but he works with the College of Bishops. And I don't know how many thousands of bishops there are today, but all over the world. So no, it would be incorrect to say he runs everything. The fact is, the Pope theologically has no more or no less power than Peter had in relation to the other apostles. For example, one of the things Peter did right after the descent of the Holy Spirit was that he said we should elect or pick somebody to take Judas's place. And so he told the other apostles that. They decided to draw lots between two men. Well, if Peter ran everything, he just could have appointed somebody, but that's not how it worked. So he's the head of the apostles, but he confers and works with the others.
That's a reference, incidentally, to the first chapter of Acts.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's what happened in Acts.
That's right. So even today, the Pope wears many hats.
Yeah.
He has different authorities. He has theological authority, he has administrative authority. Can you maybe outline those a little bit more, because they are vastly different?
Yeah. Well, one of the administrative authorities he has today would be, generally speaking, the Pope appoints the bishops. That has not always been the case. Sometimes the bishops were elected. In fact, the people of Rome once elected the Bishop of Rome, who was the Pope. Sometimes it's the people and the clergy. Sometimes it's just the clergy. Some other times in history, not too favorably, kings and emperors have pretty much dictated to the Pope who is to be appointed a bishop or a cardinal. So, but that's an administrative function that could be changed. But the fact that he is the leader of the other apostles, we consider that the bishops are the descendants of the apostles. And just as Peter was the leader of the apostles, so too the Pope, or the Bishop of Rome, is the leader of the bishops. So that would be one example.
I see. I'd like to return briefly to the character of Peter. Peter has always fascinated me because he was such a human example. He had so many failings, and you could see that Christ loved him so much. And it's almost like going back and looking at the relationship of David to his God, that he had so many failings, and you could tell how much God loved him and how sorrowful he was for his sins and everything, and the forgiveness of God for him. Why do you think that Peter was chosen above the other apostles? Why do you think, just as a personal idea, why do you think he chose
Richard?
Peter? What was it about Peter?
I think Peter was his best friend. I think he knew that under this blundering, maybe sometimes slow thinking person was a man of great depth and immense character and complete integrity. I think that Peter represents that to all of us. His blundering didn't just end with his betrayal and then forgiveness for, not betrayal, denial. That's a big difference too.
Yeah, it is a big difference.
The denial. But even later in the book of Acts, there's this story about Peter going to visit Paul in Antioch, and they're getting into an argument, and he comes home and then goes down to the sea coast to rest for a while, and has this encounter with an angel. And it's all about his realizing that he had been wrong and that Paul was right, and that this whole Christian movement was being perceived by Paul better than by the original 12. And Peter comes around and he changes his views. And I think that's why he went and joined Paul in Rome.
And I might just add, one, he was an older man as far as we know, older than certainly some of the other apostles. But to put it in a secular mode, I always I thought of Peter like George Washington or Eisenhower. Might not have been the sharpest guy, but he was a fella that everybody respected, everybody loved, and people would follow, and he could bring the whole group along. So that's kind of my thought of him. Well, anyway, Kim, it's been delightful having you with us, and hope you can be back with us again soon. But I see by the proverbial clock that we're kind of coming to the end of our session. But I would like to say maybe the folks could be with us again next week. We'll be talking about your favorite, Richard, St. Paul. So thank you for being with us. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Richard. This is Jim Walsh saying thank you for watching We Believe.
Today's program has been brought to you by a grant from your local Knights of Columbus Council. The Knights of Columbus is a fraternal order of Catholic men dedicated to the service of God and neighbor. Last year alone, the Knights provided over $109 million and 55 million volunteer hours helping those in need. The Knights of Columbus truly surge with service. Deacon Walsh and Dr. Shriver would like to hear from you if you have questions or topics you want discussed. Or if you'd like a free booklet giving further information about the topics discussed today, write We Believe at Post Office Box 50654, Nashville, Tennessee 37205. That's We Believe, Post Office Box 50654, Nashville, Tennessee 37205. Visit our website at www.webelieveshow.org. That's www.webelieveshow.org. Our email address is jimwalsh@webelieveshow.org. When you write, be sure to mention the number of the program. This is program number 835, The Primacy of Peter. Thanks for watching We Believe. We Believe is designed to promote better understanding among persons of different faiths. Deacon Walsh and Dr. Shriver have recorded a 16-part series available on CD or cassette, providing a broad overview of the Christian religion. Deacon Walsh explains the teachings of the Catholic faith, and Dr. Shriver responds with a Protestant perspective. For information, write We Believe, P.O. Box 50654, Nashville, Tennessee 37205, or visit our website at webelieveshow.org.